Hey friends, my name is Jocelyn. Thank you so much for tuning back into my channel. I hope you guys are enjoying the information so far. So now that we've gone over all the information that I wanted to talk about in the last two videos as far as quantum physics and atoms and lights and waves, this is the video where we're going to be talking about specifically biology. So I know I talked about in the last video brain chemicals and how those get produced in the body and how they have a specific molecular structure to them and how that's actually even tied to the energy we have and how we can experience that as humans as far as the emotions that we experience because brain chemicals are tied to the emotions that we have. So this is where I'm going to dive into what happens after that brain chemical is produced in the hypothalamus. What happens? Let's say you're thinking a negative thought. You're thinking about that you can't pay your bills, or that you're stressed that your lover might be cheating on you, or something along those lines, which probably might cause a little bit of stress, which might create the brain chemical like cortisol. That'd probably be tied in, since cortisol is tied to stress. Makes sense that's going to be created in your hypothalamus. So what happens from that point on is the cortisol brain chemical will get transferred to the rest of your body. Now, your body consists of about, on average, 37.2 trillion cells. And each one of those individual cells consists of about, on average, 100 trillion atoms. So keep that into perspective. Again, we're going to keep going back to, at the core level of us, we're made up of that energy and light and atoms, and they have these electrons that are absorbing photons of light. And so keep all of that good information in mind as we go along. So again, that brain chemical gets transferred to the rest of the cells in your body. So let's talk about an individual cell. We've got the outside, pretty much a whole cell is made up of protein. And on the outside of the cell is what are called receptors. Now these are so important to the cell, and all of the chemical reactions and behavior that happens inside of the cell is really dependent on these receptors. So let me explain what they are. Receptors are kind of like this docking station that sit on the very outside of the cell. Now, there can be hundreds to thousands to millions of receptors on each individual cell. And these receptors are, like I said, they're kind of like docking stations for chemicals and information to dock onto, so that information and chemicals can get inside of the cell where all the really good stuff happens. So like I said before, there can be hundreds to thousands to millions of receptors on each one of the individual cells, and this is why. There is a very specific receptor that will only take very specific brain chemicals or information that will allow it to dock onto it so that information can go into the cell. So there's a very specific receptor that's just for the brain chemical cortisol. There's a very specific receptor that will only take the brain chemical dopamine. So that is literally how each one of those receptors will react. Now, the really fascinating thing is we all know that your cells can become addicted to chemicals, whether it's like food or brain chemicals. If we think an excess amount of stressful thoughts, the cells inside your body actually become addicted to that chemical, and even sugar. This is what happens with food and drugs and things like that, is because what happens is when you're putting an excess amount of a chemical into your body, like I've said, like cortisol or sugar or a drug of some kind, and you become addicted to it, it's because if you're putting that excess amount of that chemical into your body on a day-to-day basis, on a constant basis, then the cells, they try to keep up with that incoming chemical that you keep putting into the body, so they will produce even more receptors that will take on that incoming chemical. So like I said, if you're thinking an excess crazy amount of stressful thoughts, like if you're going through a really hard time, which we all experience on a day-to-day basis, if you're not able to pay your bills, if you're in a very toxic or abusive type of relationship, and you're thinking these really stressful thoughts constantly throughout your day, then your hypothalamus is in overload trying to create that brain chemical over and over and over again. And all that excess cortisol is going to the cells in your body. And then it's docking onto those cells, and so the cells are like, like we need to like take on all this incoming amount. So they just keep popping up all these cortisol receptors, or these adrenaline receptors, or these norepinephrine receptors. And then that in and of itself is how a cell becomes addicted to a chemical. And then that is, of course, the energy that you're going to be putting out there, in not only into your environment, but into the universe. So this is why it's so important to kind of get a hold of that, to really keep control of those thoughts and really find peace in those stressful moments, because that's the only real way that you're going to move past it and kind of evolve that emotion. So in my last video, I talked about how there's brain chemicals that have these very specific energy. You know, we can tell from how we experience specific emotions and things, we can tell the energy that is tied to them. What's so fascinating is a lower vibrational brain chemical or emotion, since they're both tied to each other, if it has been produced in your brain at a young age, then it actually becomes stuck energy within the body. Now, what does that mean? Because in a spiritual way, yeah, that sounds kind of like, oh, like that's stuck energy and maybe I need to use Reiki or something to get over that. No, scientifically, if as a child you are raised in a more stressful environment, say you have parents that yell at you all the time or abusive or anything like that, then the way that it becomes stuck energy in your body is because right there, that is creating the reality around you. That is showing you that that is what a normal relationship looks like, is someone yelling or someone physically abusive or things of that nature. So then you as a child, when you see that experience, you will produce a brain chemical that will probably be linked to cortisol, that is stressful, or fear, or that type of thing, which will have a lower vibrational energy to it, okay? And then what happens is that gets transferred to the rest of the cells in your body. And then the cells, since that's pretty much the day-to-day environment that the child goes through, the cells in their own body are trying to keep up with that excess amount of brain chemical that's being transferred to the rest of the body. So their own cells are creating even more and more receptors to take on all that incoming chemical. And that right there, all those receptors, say that there's like, let's say for example, let's take a cell, okay? And let's say a fourth of that cell is full of like dopamine receptors, okay? This is very generally put. This is just an example so you can really picture what it means when we call something stuck energy. Let's say that you were raised in a really stressful environment as a child, and that fourth of your cell is going to have like dopamine receptors, where the other 3/4 of your cell is going to be like cortisol receptors or fear-based receptors, okay? That right there is how you have stuck energy. If you have receptors that are vibrating at that cortisol level and they will only take that cortisol chemical, that right there is stuck energy. So that, my friends, that's what it means as a whole. This is kind of the whole basis of law of attraction, where if you're not getting the things that you want, it's because of that stuck energy that's within the cells. It's because of those limiting beliefs that we've been raised with in our environment and it's no fault of our parents. They're just teaching us what they've been taught, and it's been passed on generation to generation to generation. But the whole goal of this is not only to take a look at those things, to look at that shadow aspect of yourself and really approach those emotions, but to transcend them, to really move up that vibrational scale of emotions. And we do that with our thoughts. Now, I want to clear up a really big misconception, because I do not believe in suppressing emotions with positivity. There's a very fine line here between thinking positive thoughts and transcending these chemicals within our bodies, you know, within the cells, and kind of moving that stuck energy that is stuck in the cells and just suppressing things even more and more. So there's a process, and I'll be going over that in another video, to really transmuting those emotions, really moving through that energy and moving up the vibrational scale of emotions so that you can kind of get over that self-limiting beliefs, those beliefs that have been passed down to all of us by our parents. That's kind of the basis of biology. Now, the one last thing that I really wanted to cover and kind of go over with biology as well is I wanted to talk about amino acids. So I talked about them a little bit in the last video, how our brain chemicals are made up of amino acids, and our bodies need 20 amino acids to survive in the world. 9 of them are what are called the 9 essential amino acids, and we actually get them from food. So it's really important that we take high vibrational energy foods into our diet. And I'm going to make another video specifically about food, but I'm going to touch on the basics just a little bit, because there is an energy to food that we ingest and we put into our body, okay? And the combination between the brain chemicals is what gets transferred to the cells of our body. So inside the cell is, like I said, there's the nucleus that contains the DNA. And then there's also what are called the ribosomes inside of the cells. And we know that the DNA is kind of the recipe or the blueprint to make up a human, to create an organism, to create you or I. So the process, how that actually happens, is that DNA inside the nucleus will send what is called mRNA, or messenger RNA, out into the cell. And it's kind of like a little portion of the DNA to tell the cell how to make even more cells. So the receptors will take on amino acids into the cell, and the amino acids will combine with what is called the ribosome, and the messenger RNA will also combine those. So those 3 come together and they create more proteins, which will come together to create even more cells in your body. So this is huge to realize, because your brain chemicals, if you are thinking, like I've said, an excess amount of stressful cortisol type based thoughts that have a lower vibration, then really think about that. That is going into the cells in your body, and that is what your new cells are going to be produced of. So your cells are making even more new cells that are, say, cortisol based, because that's the specific amino acid that's coming in and creating the new cells in your body. So this is why it's so important. And now, I don't want this to completely sound negative, because the opposite is true. If you're vibrating at a very high level, if you're thinking very positive thoughts and kind of going along with life in a very loving, open-minded way rather than fear-based, then awesome. You're going to be producing really healthy, high vibrational cells within your body. They're going to create a higher energy in the amino acids, and that's going to go into the cells and combine with the DNA, the mRNA, and the ribosomes, and that's going to create even healthier proteins for you to go off of and run your energy off of. So the opposite is true. The positive side is great. I'm really wanting to talk about the negative, just so we understand those limiting beliefs and how they affect our reality, how they actually affect the cells at the very core of us, and how we can be emitting that energy into our outside environment, how we can, if we have more stress or fear-based emotions at the core of us, then that is the energy that's going to be emitted out from our cells, and that is where it is stuck energy. So that's kind of the basics that I wanted to go over with biology. I hope this is all making sense. Please message me if there's any questions at all. But the next video is going to be super exciting. It's going to be my favorite part. We're going to be diving into psychology. I'm going to be talking about what we all know of, like the subconscious and the conscious mind. But this is kind of where I'm really going to dive into my big mic drop moment of why our society is structured the way it is, why we experience pain, and kind of this opposite side of law of attraction, why we don't get the things that we want when we're thinking positive thoughts over and over and over again. Like, why doesn't it happen? So, tune into my next video. I really hope to see you guys over there. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in.